let's go for something which could be considered a little bit more controversial. This is again in from the world of clothing. Middle-aged men wearing long socks and strap-on leather sandals at the beach with shorts.
That's witchcraft all the way. And that's not just lacking in creativity, but that is malevolent.
You're listening to the Occupational Philosophers with Simon Banks and John Rice.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Occupational Philosophers, a mashup of creativity, curiosity, imagination, with a little bit of philosophy and play thrown in for good measure. As ever, I'm joined by my co-host, co-producer, Simon Banks in Australia. Hello, Simon.
Hello, John. Hello. And a not so serious business podcast you were meant to dash in there, but we'll let that slide by. So hello, John. Good to see you as always.
As ever, we would start with what's been catching our curious eye. Simon, I'll come to you first. What's caught your curious eye this week?
Well, John, that's a great question, because what's got my curious eye and ear is, imagine that there is like a pile of papers in your office and you're looking at them and you think, okay, I need to tidy them up. Then after a while, you just become used to them. So I'm wondering, was there a word for this type of thing? Like you might have a post-it note up in your office, which is exercise. And then after a week, you just stop. It just becomes part of the furniture, so to speak. And I was wondering, what is this called? And it does have a name, and it is habituation. Now, habituation is, let me read it out, what I've got here, the diminishing of an innate response to a frequently repeated stimulus. So the more it's there, the more we get used to it. And I was thinking, well, look, is there a number or a line or a time when this would happen? And everything I've read says it depends, okay? Sort of depends. Mm-hmm. So I thought it might be really useful for businesses, like how long does your campaign run for before people go, oh yeah, we've heard this 100 times. And when do you start to check out? And so it depends on the frequency of exposure. Also depends on the duration of the exposure, your attentional focus, like if you make an effort to consciously ignore it, your personal tolerance. I put in my paper situations, my personal tolerance for clutter, which is high, quite high at the moment, and also psychological factors as well. And if it's non-life threatening, which makes sense, we worry about it even less. And there's a very deep dive into this from a psychological perspective, which was slightly above my pay grade with the time I was going to give it to. But I might ask our guest a little bit later. So there you go, John. If you get used to something, it's called habituation.
Habituation. Well, as you were saying it, Simon, I was thinking of it on many levels. I mean, from an organisational perspective, sometimes I see values printed on the wall or something like that, and they often get forgotten about quite quickly.
Yeah, sure.
So but closer to home, I have teenage kids, and they suffer very, very strongly from habituation in terms of not noticing the crap that's all over their floor in their bedrooms.
Exactly, yeah.
And I even have a post-it note that I have been habituated to, and you've just brought it back to my attention, which says blood pressure. And it says I need to eat more fish, meditate, drink pomegranate juice, and use Benecol spread instead of butter. There you go. So I'm going to notice that for the next 2 weeks again, and then forget about it.
Well, if nothing good comes out of today's show apart from that, John,
you've saved my life.
Now, what's caught your curious eye this week?
Well, it was, again, it's something in a conversation with my children. My youngest, she's, just about to turn 13. And I realised that kids are doing thought experiments all the time. And I was curious because she'll often come back and say what they were talking about in the break or lunchtime. And it's often these little scenarios that they play out with each other, would you rather type scenarios, which are a bit like thought experiments. So the one she said recently was that they were discussing what they would do if they confronted a bear in the woods, if they were out walking with a friend. And so somebody said, well, I'd run away. And they went, well, you couldn't run away. You would never outrun the bear. And then somebody said, well, I'd climb a tree. And they said, oh, I don't know. It depends if the tree was high enough or the bear could shake it down. Somebody said, play dead. And they said, oh, that wouldn't work. And then eventually one of the kids in the group just said, well, I'd just make sure I can run faster than my friend.
Yeah.
And everybody looked at him and sort of said, that was thought experiment that went from something very practical to something quite ethical. There was a dubious moral at play.
The trolley experiment, isn't it?
Yeah. So I was quite taken by the fact that kids are great at doing thought experiments. So I'm going to listen in a bit more frequently, I think, to these thought experiments they have at school. Anyway, so that was that.
My daughter and I do these all the time, and I'll say, look, would you rather drink this or eat that? They're all very lowbrow for most of them. She goes, will it kill me? And I go, well, I don't know. That's the thought experiment. You have to make that decision if it would kill you or not. So, but anyway, we digress.
So, Simon, we have a guest episode this week, which is always very exciting. Can you tell us who is the curious cat we have with us this week?
Well, John, as always, what an absolute pleasure. Let me read out the amazing bio for our upcoming guest. Our guest is Professor of Engineering Innovation at the University of South Australia. He specialises in helping people and organisations become better, more effective problem solvers. Now, he joined the School of Engineering at the South Australian Institute of Technology in 1990 after serving 4 years in the United Kingdom's Royal Navy with deployments in the Caribbean and the Middle East. Following the establishment of the university in 1991, he completed a PhD in Measurement Systems Engineering in 1997 and a graduate certificate in higher education in 2002. Now, he's taught a wide variety of courses on engineering, including digital electronics, linear electronics, systems engineering, and engineering design. He teaches creativity and innovation across programs, from gifted education through to management. His research interests span creativity and education, the assessment of creativity, the role of creativity in terrorism and crime, which we'll dive into a little bit more later. And most recently, he's been researching the intersection of creativity and AI. Now, we always think, well, surely there can't be more, but oh yes, there is. He's an author and a co-author of 10 books, including Creativity in Education, a user's guide for educators, parents, and students, through to the psychology of innovation in organizations. Now, as a recognised expert in creative problem solving and innovation, our guest was a scientific consultant and on-screen expert for the Australian ABC TV documentary series, Redesign My Brain, which is absolutely huge in Australia and also around the world on National Geographic, Life at 9, and also Redesign My Brain Series 2. And for 25 years, he has helped schools and organisations in Australia, the US and Europe develop more effective creative problem solvers. Now, John, as always, we think we really need to do more with our life when we hear those bios. So ours is John went to work and came home, the end. but on that note, please give a huge round of applause for Dr. David Cropley. Woo! David, welcome to the show, and we'll jump straight to it. What's caught your curious eye this week?
Well, first of all, thanks, Simon and John, for the invitation. But I thought I'd try to be a little bit, left field in answering this question, and also with something that kind of combines my background in engineering. And the thing that caught my eye this week was the recent Formula One Grand Prix in Miami. And lots of people follow Formula One, but the thing that particularly interests me about it is that I was looking at the finishing times and so on, and I've always thought this was the case, but I actually did some calculations, and the difference between first place and fifth place in this most recent Grand Prix in percentage terms was a margin of 0.22%. And then I thought, well, how does that compare to other sports and so on? And I did, again, a quick calculation for the men's 100-meter final in the last Olympics, and the difference between first place and fifth there was around 1.5%, so about 7 times higher. And the long story short is that it shows me that although you might not sort of naturally think it, the margins in Formula One are incredibly tiny. And I think what makes that even more interesting is that, of course, that's not just the cars, but it's also the performance of the drivers and even the performance of their crew and so on. So it kind of got me thinking that, you only need to have, the tiniest of tiny off days. And you can see that can be the difference between being a hero and being a nobody. And, I just thought, it shows you just how razor thin those margins are and why the teams they go for tiny improvements to the cars, but if that just makes the car a tenth of a second faster per lap, that can still be the difference between coming first and coming last. So it just got me thinking, and I thought, it's very interesting, and especially when you compare it to other sports.
That is fascinating to have it sort of in those with that numerical or quantification of that, because that's really interesting. Then you go, I wonder then how they debrief or dissect then said performance in a given race or whatever, and go, okay, well, was it the technology? Was it the driver? Was it the pit crew? Where do we get that extra 0.22% back or in favour to our own team? That's incredible, isn't it?
It also shows you how
conversations.
The sustained level of performance that they need within a race and from one race to the next. So, it kind of gives me a new respect for the effort that goes into that sort of sport.
Yeah.
And there's, you may know this person, David, there's Richard, I forget his last name, but he used to be the performance director, I believe, for Red Bull, and he's now a lecturer at UTS in Sydney. Richard, I'm saying Hopgood or Hobgood, I don't think I've got that right, but he said when he joined Red Bull, they were highly enthusiastic, maybe 4 or 5 years, and had 3 third places. However, he then got them to rechange their system, and instead of operating 120%, which doesn't make sense, but like overstretched the whole time, he made them only operate at 90% or 85%, and they built in 10 to 15% thinking time. So they actually had to sit down and go, okay, well, what are those things we can do to improve and experiment with and test and try? So we built that into their operating system, that thinking time. So it just goes to show you how, and obviously they did very well on the back of that and continue to do very well. But just what happens when you, 0.22%. Yeah, I love it.
So there is a good lesson to be learned that applies to the sort of things that we're talking about.
Of course, we shouldn't forget, David, Simon, that in the film This Is Spinal Tap, David Tufnell obviously managed to produce an amplifier that went to 110% or 11, as he called it. So, the laws of physics can be bent.
Now, David, where are you in the world today? We have listeners from all over the world. Where are you in the world today, and what can you see out your window?
Yep. So I live in Adelaide in South Australia, which, talking about Formula One, the older people might remember the Australian Grand Prix used to be here. But so I live in a suburb called Hallett Cove, which is a southern suburb in Adelaide, basically right on the coast. And if I kind of lean out the window and look through the trees, we're close to the edge of the cliff, a couple of houses back, but you can just about see the ocean. And so it's very nice today because although it's late autumn, it's been about 22 degrees centigrade today. The sun's shining and setting, in the west there. So we're very lucky that we live in a very nice climate. And unlike, even some other parts of Australia, we have, pretty kind weather here. It gets hot in the summer, but, we avoid the worst of heavy rain and that sort of thing. So it's a pretty Mediterranean climate here in Adelaide.
It's about the opposite of where you are, John, is what we're saying without rubbing it in. Yeah.
Yeah. I can see the sea because it's lapping up against the sort of upper window of the house as I get flooded and have to move to Scotland. Just as a quick note, Dave, by the sea, I think I saw somewhere that you're a keen rower. Is that right? Do you get out on the water? Is that on the sea? Is it river? How do you do that?
Both, although for the last few years I haven't been out on the water because I had a couple of sort of health-related issues that the doctor said take it easy for a while, and then I kind of got out of the habit. So I'm still a member of a rowing club. And here in Adelaide, we're very lucky. There's a river through the centre of the city that kind of widens out, and there's sort of a short rowing course on the river in the city centre, but we also have an Olympic standard course down parallel to a beach, so it's actually salt water, but a proper, 2,000-meter Olympic course. So the rowing here in Adelaide, is kind of on the river, but also in salt water near the beach. And so I only took that up in my mid-30s when I was sort of starting to get older and fatter and thought I needed to get off the backside and do something. But I row, 5 or 6 days a week on the rowing machine still as my main sort of form of physical activity. So.
Yeah. Well, you didn't really get off your backside, did you? Because you're sitting down for the most part.
Yeah.
But that's wordsmithing. That's wordsmithing. But I'm glad that's what you were listening for, John. So. Now, the next part of the podcast is, look, you've probably been in those, we call it a dinner party introduction. So I imagine you've been in those dinner parties where you sit down, you maybe don't know so many people, and you sit next to someone and the first question is, oh, what do you do? And you go, oh, I do this. And the conversation feels a bit stilted. So John and I have thought, well, if we did go to a great dinner party, what might be some good conversation starters? So I want you to imagine we've all sat down together. We've got some nice red wines from the Barossa Valley, and we're going to pour those out and we're going to share them around. We've got some lovely food. And my first question is, now you've sat down, oh, hi, David. What's giving you joy at the moment?
Well, I don't know if this seems like a cliche, but basically watching my kids' activities. So my 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl, they're all in their 20s, but they've all now gone overseas. One of them lives in Berlin, the eldest. One of them lives in London now for about the last year, and the youngest son lives in Los Angeles. But it's especially fascinating for me, not just as a parent, but talking about creativity, because they're all involved in the arts, basically. So the oldest son works for a video game company in Germany as a writer, not code writing, but story writing. My daughter, who lives in London, is a sort of budding screenwriter and involved in acting and so on. And the youngest son in Los Angeles is an actor. And just, like I said, both as a proud parent, but also talking about things like creativity and watching them involved in those professions, which require, of course, a strong degree of creativity is very interesting as well.
Yeah, how cool! Definitely. That's well, obviously, what you're saying must be working. So listen in, everyone. Listen in. Yeah. Listen in.
It's no thanks to me. It's my wife who takes all the credit for sort of pushing them along those things. But I just sort of stand back as an interested observer.
And David, we mentioned rowing, but is there any hobbies that you do lose yourself in at the moment?
Well, the answer that I had sort of pre-prepared here was the rowing, because I'm kind of heavily involved in that. And as I said, even now, I still do that. Try to do that sort of 6 days a week. But maybe the interesting little extra bit to tell you about that is just in terms of indoor rowing. As I got into it years ago in 2010, along with another guy that I rowed with on the water, we thought we'd have a crack at an indoor rowing world record. And we actually set the record in our age group, which, for the people who keep the records, the 40 to 49-year-old heavyweight men. We did so this is one guy at a time. So taking turns on the one rowing machine, we set a new record for a 24-hour row. And then after that, we go, well, this is pretty good. So we looked around at other ones, and there was also a category for a 100-kilometer row, which takes about 6 hours. And in 2012, we did that one and set a record again in our age group. And both of those stood for about a year or a year and a half. So, and I mean, I like that because I like to have some sort of goal or objective rather than just running on a treadmill for no reason or rowing on a rowing machine. So I've always found it kind of helps me to get more enthusiastic about that, having things like that to do.
Wow.
What I like is you say it's nice to have a goal or objectives. Most people would say, go to the gym 3 times a week. You've gone, I like to break Guinness World Records. So your bar is quite high.
Have you, I have to ask, so, and David, is there something on the horizon then? Have you got, are you going to do it again for a new age category or something? Or
yeah, I have thought about that recently, but then I kind of, I'll tell you the other interesting thing about it that, I learned, some real lessons was that everything was the preparation. And in both of those 2 different records, one of which was basically a slow, steady state. The other was basically a sprint. But in both cases, I knew before we started that we were going to break the record because I knew how well prepared we were. And the actual execution on the day was just, as long as somebody didn't get injured, I knew before we started that we were going to break the record because I knew we were well prepared. And so even if I don't do another one, I feel, it did give me some sort of life lesson and insight into things that flows through into other activities.
Yeah, there's certainly a life lesson there. Being well prepared. Yeah. And in terms of what's inspiring you at the moment, or who's inspiring you at the moment? What kind of things catch your eye there?
Well, I was going to say my kids again, but that'll start to get boring. But my father actually is a source of inspiration, but for maybe a slightly unusual reason, and that is he's also a creativity researcher. And in fact, the way I got into it was through him. But I'm sort of an outsider in creativity research, being an engineer, whereas he's a psychologist and has been a creativity researcher since before I was born. But I, by pure chance, started collaborating with him. So he and I have been collaborating for 25 years. And of course, you can probably guess that means he's pretty old. And so what inspires me is he's now 88, but still, we still publish things together. And I go and see him 2 or 3 mornings a week before work. And we have a coffee and chat about something to do with creativity, or he says, I just read a paper that I saw you published, and, it was very well written and I really enjoyed reading it. So, he's not necessarily because of the creativity research, but he really stands out for me as an example of somebody who's isn't just sort of sitting waiting for it all to end, but you can see that that's kept him invigorated and interested in life and active and so on, because he's stayed actively engaged in something. And it doesn't matter whether it was creativity research or something else, but it kind of showed me that's how you live well into old age is by really staying engaged and excited about something.
This is incredible. We're barely 15 minutes in, David, and you've given us 2 fantastic life lessons already, which is be prepared and stay engaged if you want to live well. This is brilliant. Yeah. You're a modern day philosopher, if ever there was. I want you back. I want you on the show on a regular basis.
At the age of about 60 or a little bit older, he started visiting Latvia on a yearly basis, just as a sort of guest lecturer. And then he decided, I'm going to learn Latvian. So he took Latvian lessons. and then, get this, then he decided, the Latvians have an epic poem that's, hundreds of pages long that describes a sort of folk hero in Latvian history, which hadn't been translated into English. So he decided, after learning Latvian for about 10 years, that he would translate it into English, but not just plain English. He translated into rhyming iambic pentameter in English and then published that. And then got an award from the president of Latvia, the equivalent of an MBE or an Order of Australia from the president of Latvia for cultural services to Latvia. So again, another amazing example of just deciding, when you're 60 or 70 years old, to do something new and interesting. And again, I mean, that's got to be one of the reasons why he's 88 years old, but as sharp as a tack and well and so on.
You imagine the conversations around the dinner table. Maybe you're at the bowls club or something. What did you guys get up to last week? Oh, I watched Neighbours and mowed the lawns. What did you do? Oh, I converted a Latvian 100-page Latvian poem into iambic pentameter. Oh, okay. You're buying the beers then, yeah.
He won't shut up about it. That's the problem.
Yeah, I think we'll have to get. And it's am I right, David? Your father's name is it Arthur Cropley?
Yes,
is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes. So I think we'll get Arthur on, Simon.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. We can get the dynamic duo. So.
Now, the computer and everything for him. But,
the dinner party is going well, so I'll dive into our next question. What are you curious about right now, or what big question are you wrestling with?
Well, this is where we kind of start to really focus on creativity in a way. And the thing that kind of bothers me in creativity research is that despite having been around for probably close to 70 years now in its modern form, there's really a gap between creativity research and the application of that research. And, it's a problem for a lot of disciplines, but of course, I see it particularly in creativity. And in simple terms, it's that although we know a massive amount about creativity, there's been lots of research. Why isn't it more sort of firmly embedded in schools? And everybody talks about it now, and it's a current hot topic. But that's happened before. There's been waves of interest in creativity, but they've always died off. Whereas now it's important. So the thing that's got me sort of fired up is that I think that gap between creativity research and application in places like schools basically comes down to the lack of fitness for purpose of creativity measures. In other words, the measures of creativity we have some problems, and it's those problems that are the cause of this gap between research and application. And that's kind of what I've set my mind to for the next few years.
And so what does that mean, that you have an overarching objective in that study, David? How would you frame that, your goal in that regard then? Well, is it to find a test or an assessment that is more objective in some fashion? Or?
Well, the answer, and again, I think we'll get onto this in more detail later, but it's that AI is presenting some interesting opportunities for solving this fitness for purpose problem of basically making good tests of creativity more accessible and easier to use. That's the nub of the problem. And so the context for this is also that I signed a pre-retirement contract with the university 2 years ago, a 5-year contract. So I've got 3 years to go before I officially retire. And far from winding down and taking it easy, that's really kind of focused me on, now, okay, I've got 3 years to solve this problem or to solve it as best I can. So I feel kind of more motivated since making that decision to say, well, what do I want to do with the remaining time in my career, and how can I best do that?
Well, I think that's a nice segue into our next question, as in a great dinner party as well. How would you describe what you do, or if you sit in the middle of 3 or 4 things, what are they? Because I'm hearing multiple lenses come out here, if that's the right word.
Yeah. Look, you actually said it in my bio. Of course, I've carefully crafted a 10-word elevator pitch. But I think this captures it nicely. And it's basically, I see myself as helping people and organizations become more effective problem solvers. And then, of course, the particular pathway to that is helping develop their creativity. But in terms of the things that I sort of sit in the middle of, and I'd never really actually drawn a little diagram for myself until today in response to this, thinking about this question, that the 4 things I'd say are engineering, creativity, problem solving, and education. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought probably everything I do sits in at least 2 of those at any given time, sometimes 3 or 4. And I think, so I was quite excited thinking about this question, because I thought, wow, actually, this has given me a little bit of insight into how to sort of explain what I do. But I think that's it: engineering, creativity, problem solving, and education. And if I picked anything I did, I'd say you could probably tick at least 2 of those.
And in all of that, you just reminded me, David, that in all of that work into engineering, education, creativity, the question that's most on my lips at the moment is, where did you learn to play harmonica?
I taught myself. So I back in about 2010, I can't remember why, but I had a friend which I've only just started being involved in a band again with him literally in the last few weeks. But back in 2010, I think because he said, he plays the guitar and, we should do something, that I thought, well, I got to find some instrument that's sort of appropriate to a rock type band. And I thought, well, harmonica can't be that hard. In fact, I'd say the harmonica is very easy to learn. I just got to teach yourself harmonica book. And thought, this isn't too bad.
Of course you did. And your father's probably going to pick it up next week as well.
Once I got off the rower, break a record, I thought, just teach myself to do this.
But to reach a reasonably, okay level where you can sort of have a bit of fun in a band and so on. So, but I've just started doing but again recently, because this guy, we didn't do that for years, and then he's with plays in a band with other guys and said, we need a singer, so I'm doing a bit of singing with those guys.
Nice.
And one song we do, which is AC/DC's It's a Long Way to the Top, that it has bagpipes in it. The harmonica is a very nice substitute for the bagpipes in that. So.
I like that. I have to say, David, I mentioned to my older son, I said, the chap, he's fantastic. He does all this work in this, and he's Rose, and he plays harmonica. And his first response is, where did he learn to play that? Was it in prison? He had this image of some woeful soul sat in a cell lamenting their life
in the deep south of America or something.
So there you go. Please tell me you haven't been in prison.
No,
You haven't
no,
added that to
not,
your
yet,
CV yet.
not yet anyway.
Not yet. Not yet. No. Yeah. You can.
Well,
You can age disgracefully at some future point.
I'm looking around the room and we've been so deep in the conversation, everyone else has gone home. So, look, I think our dinner party went well. So, we'll just finish off the last of the wine. And thanks for joining us at Dinner Party Conversations.
So, David, we just want to get a little bit more under the skin of what it is you do, which you described a few moments ago in terms of those intersections and where you play, and just to see how what you do plays into curiosity and creativity, imagination as well. But the question to start with is tying it into innovation, and we sometimes hear these words used interchangeably, particularly in organisations. So I was just going to say, what is innovation and what's the difference between that and creativity?
So my go-to definition for this is that creativity is about the generation of effective novelty. In other words, just coming up with novel and effective ideas or products or solutions, whereas innovation is the exploitation of effective novelty. So generation of effective novelty versus exploitation. And I mean, in simpler terms, creativity gets the ideas, but innovation actually puts the rubber on the road and puts those ideas into practice.
That ties slightly to, I always remember seeing some interview with Steve Jobs, and I think he kind of went to that theme a little, where he was going, look, the ideas was one thing, but there was this massive journey, innovation journey, and so much detail in that, the 0.22% of Formula One excellence that needs to happen.
Well, it's also, I've got some Italian colleagues, and I sometimes upset them by, when they say, "Oh, Leonardo da Vinci was so creative and so on, and or innovative," and I say, "Well, just because he drew a picture of a parachute or a helicopter or a tank, he never actually built any of those things, and so there's a difference. He was creative, but he wasn't innovative in the sense that." I mean, right now I can say to you, okay, I've just invented an intergalactic matter transporter. It's a machine, it's a box about this big, and you press some buttons on it and you can transport anything anywhere in the universe. I mean, that, you wouldn't really say that I've invented that, just drawing a picture and having the idea. There's more, to innovation than just the idea. It's actually executing it and making it happen.
Yeah.
And then we had a previous guest Gemma Enright, who sold her startup called Money Brilliance and went from idea to execution to, bailout. That's not the right word, to selling it, moving on to her next venture. She said, ideas are cheap, execution is everything, which ties into that sort of that interplay. And what do you think scares people more in organizations? Is it creativity or innovation, or is that even the right question?
Well, I think they probably, both of those things scare them, but in different ways, because it goes back to the core issue here that that there are different facets of personality and thinking skills and organizational climate that are required to support those different things, and it kind of brings us to this point that innovation consists of a number of phases, which includes the sort of creative phase of coming up with the idea, but also includes phases of analysis and execution. And each one of those phases requires you to think in different ways, requires a different kind of support. So I think what scares organizations maybe is trying to understand what are the right things to do at the right time in that process. That's the tricky bit of it.
And that's, one of the key distinctions there is you've got the divergent thinking that would be recognized in the creativity phase. And then actually much of it is quite focused, convergent thinking. As you say, framing it as different phases of thinking, I think is really nice. And organizations don't actually have an appreciation of that a lot of times, do they?
I think a lot of ways that, there's a lot of innovation tools that say, well, assess your innovation. But all of them that I've looked at treat innovation as a kind of a one-size-fits-all process, that it's just like one step of start here, innovate, and get there. That kind of fails to recognize the nuances and so on, and that there are multiple steps that have to be dealt with in different ways. So you've hit the nail on the head.
And just the sheer effort required.
Yeah,
Absolute effort required to innovate is huge, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's sometimes organisations actually are not willing or not able to put in that huge amount of effort, persistence.
And then each time you do that, say you have an innovation process, each time you do that, for a myriad of reasons, things will turn out completely differently. And it's those little nuances. And so it's almost, we often talk around here, it's said that sitting in ambiguity, which might be an overused phrase, that ability to sit in that mess and, paddle through it, row backwards, go in reverse, look at it from all different angles, which is that, I guess the structured mess of innovation might be sort of a way to think about it. Does that sort of land correctly in your world? Or?
Absolutely. And I mean, even more than that, sometimes you get, let's just give them random numbers, you get to stage 3. But instead of going to stage 4, you have to loop back to stage 2 or stage 1. So there are all these sort of loops and feedback loops and diversions and so on. So even though you can define a linear process, it rarely pans out in a nice linear fashion.
And that would throw in the whole idea around failure, experimentation, as you say, feedback loops as well, and just an expectation that you won't always be taking steps forward. Yeah. And again, that's something that's difficult for organisations to countenance, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, nobody likes failure and so on, and so that can be quite challenging as psychologically, apart from anything else.
Well, I think that's a nice jump into that what I want to talk around next. Now, in the program Life at 9 you're involved with, and I remember watching this I guess almost a decade ago, great show, and it was said childhood creativity is even a greater predictor than the IQ of success later in life. So what was the show about, and what were the tests that you did when you had the age group around 9 years old, if my memory serves me correctly?
Yep. So it was a part of what the ABC did as the Life series. So they had a group, I think, initially of 20 kids, something like that they were tracking throughout, their lifetime. And so there were previous episodes or groups of episodes, I think, when they were 7 years old, 5 years old, a bit like the what was it in the UK? There was that.
7 Up or something
7 Up,
like that.
yeah. But on shorter intervals. I only got involved when they did them at the age of 9, and one of the reasons they focused on creativity in that particular part of the series was that there is a theory that's got reasonable support in creativity, that children experience a slump in creativity at around that age. It's often referred to as a 4th grade slump, but it's sort of age 9, 10. And so they wanted to sort of investigate that as part of this series, looking at these kids and how they develop. So to sort of support that in the show, I tested their creativity. I used a test that we'll probably talk about later, tested their creativity, and was then interesting to sort of look at the different aspects of what they already knew about these kids. But one thing in particular we then did is they had a sort of a laboratory in the studio where they would take these kids in and do various sort of activities with them, and they had cameras all around and so on. And for that, I devised a kind of practical creative problem-solving test. So this is, we wanted to go from the creativity test says this is how creative they are in terms of their potential to be creative. But then let's do an actual problem-solving task that requires creativity to see whether their potential matches how they actually perform in the test, and just what do we learn about that. So I created a little task where I got some of this, toy slime, that sort of green goo.
Yep.
And the story was that, this was sort of radioactive waste, and they had to get that from a container through a piece of pipe and then, into another container and so on. And there were only certain things like some tin foil, some string, a wooden spoon, and so on. But I'd picked the wooden spoon wouldn't fit in the container and things like this. And they were given very vague instructions. So I sat in the room with them one at a time while they did this and just said, you've got to get that slime from here to here. You can do anything you want. And then afterwards, they discussed how that compared to what we knew about their creativity and so on. But it was very interesting being in the room with them because, it shows you how personality plays such a role in creativity. one of the kids just sat there, listened to the explanation, and then literally just sort of folded his arms and said, I don't know what to do, and kind of just gave up in the first few seconds. Whereas some of the other kids would, as you would hope they do, would literally try anything. And they tried, you could see them thinking, oh, maybe the spoon will fit in there. But when that didn't work, they just said, okay, I'll try something else. So you really saw elements of personality, which is being open to new ideas, being tolerant of uncertainty, being prepared to sort of redefine the problem in their own head, all kind of coming into play. And the kids who were good at that fared much better in solving this problem than the kids who had personalities where they sort of shut down and didn't want to take a risk and so on. So it was kind of fascinating to watch.
So it plays in a little bit to this piece around people say, I'm creative or not. Often their creativity could be around to motivation, because if I'm sort of understanding this personality piece, because those kids had the motivation to go, oh, yeah, stuff it, we'll give it a try, if that's the right word, it will jump in, as opposed to motivation not to, they then develop their creative confidence, one might say. So the next time that challenge came around, they go, oh, yeah, I've done this before, I'll give it a shot. So it's not creative or not, it's that, yeah, like you said, personality and motivation. And it's a really nice way to think about it. And I think it delves into maybe some of the excuses that we might give ourselves as well. Oh, they're more creative than me, which is potentially they just try and muck about with more stuff than you.
Yeah. Yeah. Or they tried it before and they've built some confidence, like you said.
I know that you say that creativity can be built as a habit.
Yeah.
And you talk about underpinning conditions such as being given opportunity, being given encouragement, and then seeing some reward for being creative, as it were. And of course, as you described that there, that could be good old nature-nurture debates for those particular children as they come into it. What had they experienced before that had them be rewarded for putting their hand up or not? Did that kind of sort of come into play as well in your?
Yeah, look, I mean, you're absolutely right. That creativity is a complex combination of personality-related factors like motivation, as Simon said, or attitudes and dispositions, but it's also that in combination with how you think. It's that in combination with the environment that you're trying to operate in. And if all of those things kind of work in the right way at the right time, then that's where you maximize the likelihood of seeing a creative solution. But it's this very complex interplay, which although it is a complex interplay, it doesn't mean that we don't understand it. It just means it's a complex systems phenomenon. But we know about all of the key elements, and you guys have brought those up very nicely. It's like I said, it's motivation, it's personality, it's attitudes, it's how those have been influenced by your past experience, and how they're being influenced right now by the experiences you're having. So it was interesting to see those in play. And of course, in the Life at 9, it was also the reason there's a slump, or we think there's a slump in creativity around that age. Is also that kids start to get more aware of what other people are doing at that age, and they start to maybe get more embarrassed, or they care about what other people think, and they start sort of self-censoring as well. So
yeah, that's the absolute killer, isn't it? And you see that then in evidence right through to adult life in organisations, for sure.
Yeah.
Just catching the theme still on tests, I'm going to go slightly different one on this next question, which is. What current tests are there that are best for creativity? And a side question to that, and what's the impact of LLMs on this? Can you talk to that a little bit more?
Yep. LLMs being large language models for the uneducated. Yes. Oh, look at you and your acronyms, John. Yeah.
There are in the same way that creativity is a complex phenomenon that involves personality, thinking, the environment, and so on. It's not surprising then that creativity testing sort of reflects the same thing. So you can test creativity in the sense of testing how people think. That's particularly testing divergent thinking, or your capacity for divergent thinking. But you can also test attitudes and dispositions. You can test elements of the environment. So for each of the different facets of creativity, there are tests that address each of those. And then, of course, within any of that, going back to talking about fitness for purpose, the other issue is that there are different quality tests as well. There are, for example, self-report tests. You've all done a test that says, how creative are you on a scale from 1 to 5? And you say, well, I think I'm 4. That's an okay way of testing creativity, but it's not as good as more objective tests that you're not just rating yourself. Because, of course, self-rated tests, that there's always an element of, you don't know if the people are sort of overcooking things, to look good and so on. So one of the issues for creativity research is that there are these different things you have to test, and then there are different quality tests. And what we want, going to things like large language models and AI, is that the good tests of creativity tend to be quite complex. And the exciting thing that's happening right now is that AI may be opening some possibilities for making those complex but good tests of creativity easier to administer and score. So, there's an interesting sort of, new door being opened there.
Presumably, and again, I think I might have caught this in some of the previous interviews that you've been involved with, David, is like Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences, there are multiple expressions of creativity. Yep. And so you have to think about, again, the test that takes in personality, attitude, etc. What is it? What type of creativity are we trying to get a feel for?
Yeah, that's right. So I think that well, at least I would say there are what are called domain general elements of creativity. And in simple terms, I mean, if you want to be creative, you've got to be able to think divergently, whatever activity you're involved in. But then, as you say, you get into domain specific elements, like being creative in engineering is different from being creative in music, because there are domain specific aspects. And I mean, I've always said to people, you'll find that as a pretty solid rule, the most creative engineers, first and foremost, are good engineers. Because, I mean, how could you be a creative engineer if you know nothing about engineering and mathematics and so on? And the same in music. It's highly unlikely that you're going to write symphonies if you don't even know what musical notes are. So there's definitely a domain specific element, as well as domain general elements of creativity, and that have to come together in the right way at the right time. And of course, that flows on then to the testing. How you would test and identify scientific creativity is going to be different from how you would test musical creativity.
And so this is fascinating. So the sort of example, as you said, about mathematics and music, the domain general dimension there might be the ability to see patterns, for example.
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
So, divergent thinking, but I mean, there could be common elements like that underpin both of those, versus things that are specific to the particular domain. So that's a good example.
And with the creativity tests, and I read a lot of your stuff on LinkedIn and all different places, is it the figural test of creative thinking, drawing production, TCT-DP? Is that the go-to test? And do you want to take us a little bit into this? Because I'd like to know a little bit more.
Sure, yeah. Funnily enough, it's not the go-to test for creativity, but for the reason that I've been indicating, which is that the problem with that test, I'd say it's a very good test of creativity, possibly one of the best ones, because it doesn't just test one element like cognition or divergent thinking. It's a holistic test that also taps into elements of personality like motivation and risk-taking. It taps into elements of cognition, and so it's a much more sort of broad spectrum test of creativity, but it hardly gets used. And the reason it hardly gets used is because it's basically slow and complex to score. And that instantly makes it expensive. And in fact, I had an email. I emailed the test publisher only a few days ago, seeing if they were interested in a way of automating the scoring of that, which I've done. And they said, no, they're not interested because the test is hardly used. And I thought that's funny because I know some people who've used it on a large scale recently, but the problem is, like I said, when you administer a test like that for sort of a research study, you have to have at least two people score it, and then you compare the scores to make sure to filter out a bit of random variation and so on. It can take about 15 minutes per test form to score, so it's half a person hour of effort to score one test. And I've been to schools before and said, okay, you've got 1,000 kids. Let's test all their creativity at the start of term 1. Then you guys will do something and we'll test it at the start of term 2 and we'll see if there's any difference. You're talking hundreds of hours of effort by the scorers and tens of thousands of dollars or pounds. And every conversation I've had with a school like that stops dead at that point because they say, we don't have $50,000 just sitting around to do this. We'd love to do it, but we don't have the money. So people default to using simple self-report measures that are okay, but they're never really going to give you the same amount of information and same quality of information as better tests.
And in that test, do they actually draw, if I've understood this correctly? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. If I know your listeners won't be able to see it, of course, but I'll show you guys an example on the camera. So the test form consists of this A4 sheet of paper with a large square on it, and then some other shapes within that square, like a kind of right angle, a squiggle, and a dotted line. And the person doing the test is just invited to draw whatever they like, and to imagine this was a picture that an artist was working on, finish the picture. But it's not a test of your artistic ability, because the way that it's scored has nothing to do with whether or not you draw a nice picture. It's all to do with, do you add new elements to what's already there? Do you connect the elements together? Do you literally draw outside the large square on there, like literally drawing outside the box? And various other things that therefore tap into risk-taking and also the way people impose constraints on themselves. Some people obviously look at that and think, oh, you're not meant to draw outside that box. So they impose their own rules and limitations on themselves. So this is why it's a good holistic test of creativity. So although it's drawing, it's not measuring artistic ability. And in fact, because it's a drawing test, that's good because it takes out any sort of like a cultural element or a language element, because everybody, even 4-year-old children, can complete that test and you can get a good answer to it.
Yeah, I only came across this 3 or 4 years ago. And it's the first time I've thought that is outside those bullet point things or a very controlled environment. It's actually very free form, which for me, I thought, that actually lets different parts of your brain connect and you can go on your own journey and bring in a bunch of creative intelligences, whatever they be. So, I will make sure we put a link in that to the show notes because it's a really fascinating little exercise. Now, look, you're also well known for creativity in crime, the role of creativity in crime and terrorism, identifying, measuring creativity in criminals. And if I believe I've got this true, you coined the phrase malevolent creativity. So have I got that right? What is it? And what are the strategies for negating it that we can talk about in about 5 to 6 minutes?
Well, I believe prior to when I came up with that particular term, there was, of course, already this idea that there could be a dark side to creativity, and people talked about negative creativity. But the difference was that they only talked about just accidental harm resulting from creativity, whereas I mean, inspired sounds like the wrong word, but I was inspired or maybe motivated by 9/11 to think, well, there's something more going on there. I mean, there was creativity there, but it wasn't just an accident. It was very deliberate misuse of creativity in the sense of coming up with a new and effective solution to a problem. And that's what kind of launched me on this pathway of thinking about malevolent creativity. And the fact that, I mean, we hear all the time, creativity gives businesses an advantage, a competitive advantage. Well, it gives criminals and terrorists a competitive advantage as well, because if you can come up with something new that by definition people haven't seen before, you take them by surprise. And that's almost by definition what happened on 9/11. So, and of course, the reason to then study that was to think, well, now that we know that, can we apply what we know about creativity to see if there are ways of preventing that from happening. It's kind of paradoxical because, if you run a company and you want your people to be more creative, you send them on a creativity workshop. But of course, with criminals and terrorists, we can't send them on an anti-creativity workshop. So you've got the added problem of trying to suppress their creativity at a distance and without having direct control over them. And that's Simon mentioned about strategies for negating it. That's where we take our creativity theory, and we were talking before about stages of innovation. And we say, well, now that we know that's how people solve problems, and we know the thinking skills they use and the psychological attitudes and dispositions that help that, can you use that knowledge to make it harder for a creative terrorist to carry out some action? And I'll give you one quick example, Simon, and then throw back to you. That, for example, the July 2005 bombings in London, right? We know that those terrorists practiced those attacks because there was video footage a few days before. Now, in any creative or innovative activity, if you're coming up with a new product, what do companies do? They prototype it, they get feedback, they improve it, then they launch it. That's what was going on there. They were prototyping their solution to make sure it worked, to identify any problems and so on. So how would you stop somebody from prototyping their solution and basically cutting from the idea straight to the execution and jumping over the stages of validation and verification, especially if you didn't have control over them? Well, you might, for example, put stories in the newspapers saying security services are aware that there's a plot and they're about to arrest people. So you make the terrorists think they're under time pressure. And that's one element of a creative environment that affects people's ability to be creative. So you might not stop the attack, but you might force those people into shortcutting their process, which reduces the likelihood that it'll be successful. So it's a direct analogy to business creativity, but just sort of flipped on its head.
And has this been used by agencies? Is that the right way to say it? Because when you said, often you will hear in the news, as an organisation, we're on high alert or different things, or say the police might say we're on high alert and different things. So where does this play out, and who's used it? And Yep.
Well, the first sort of serious, in some ways I don't know, but I hope some people are using it. But I was invited to a workshop in 2013, actually in Brighton. Again, John back then with the MOD. So there was a team there who were explicitly looking at this idea of malevolent creativity, and I don't know subsequently what they've done. But right now, a few years ago, there's a team at the University of Nebraska in the US who a few years ago started a very large federally funded center for basically research into counterterrorism and so on. And I know there's several of the researchers there are sort of heavily into elements of malevolent creativity. So I believe, that this informs those sorts of activities, and they're funded by the Department for Homeland Security in the US. So, there are real organizations using it. I know a person who works for, I think, the equivalent of the federal police in Portugal, who's contacted me a couple of times, who was doing some research on this. So, I believe it's informing the things that people do as another avenue, another string to the bow of police and counter-terrorism, counter-crime. If it adds one more little competitive advantage for the good guys, then, it's hopefully worth having.
So, David, it's time for Thought Experiment, which, as you know, is an opportunity, as philosophers did over eons. They had these as a means to expand their thinking, to explore topics and concepts, and to really come to some more profound conclusions around life and the universe. However, our thought experiments are slightly different to that. We're going to offer you up some examples or scenarios of creativity in action. And with your deep expertise in malevolent creativity, we want you to decide whether, in your opinion, the exampling is a case of malevolent creativity at play or a benevolent one. So this is a thought experiment. It's called Malevolent or Benevolent. If you think, so we'll give you a list of scenarios, and you just need to say, if you think it's malevolent, you need to say, Simon,
'Tis witchcraft.
Okay.
in the same tone.
Yeah.
And if you think it's benevolent, you need to say, praise be.
Okay. I'm writing these.
Just give a short reason for your answer either way. So
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Okay.
okay.
Right.
All right. So
Simon, you kick us off.
All right. The first one, artificial intelligence.
Praise be. And the reason I think, it's a very good question because it really gets to the heart of malevolent creativity. And that is that if you want to stop malevolent creativity, you don't stop creativity, you stop people doing bad things, which is all about, their personality and so on. So the fault is not with creativity, the fault is with the people who misapply it. And that's the same with AI. If there are bad things about AI, whatever the latest forms, I think it's not the AI that's to blame. It's bad people doing bad things with it.
Excellent. The next one is the alleged food product Pop-Tarts.
'Tis witchcraft. I think that's a deliberate attempt to poison people.
Okay. Now, our next one. This is the movie Jaws.
Praise be. I think that's a perfectly reasonable form of art. Again, I mean, it's the film itself can't be blamed for anything. It's if people are afraid of going swimming in the ocean, it's not the fault of the film. It's the fault of people for how they take that and internalize it, and how they fail to recognize that was just a fantasy film and so on.
And I speak to somebody
movie who lives in a country where I go swimming in the summer now several times a week in waters that have been known to have great white sharks in them, but don't worry about
it. Right. Next one is the item of cutlery, the spork.
Praise be. I think that's just an interesting attempt to find a new solution to the problem of shoveling food into your mouth, and so it's got to be applauded for an attempt to revisit the problem, to redefine the problem, and to redesign the solution.
Excellent.
All right. Now, interested in your next one. This is footwear, but Crocs.
Praise be. And I'll tell you because
controversial.
When I was rowing on the water, a lot of people wore them because you're walking across rough ground, but they have the wonderful advantage that they also float. So if you happen to kind of drop them in the water, they don't sink to the bottom, and they're nice and light, so you can walk to the water with your boat, put them in the boat, you won't lose them, and so on. So depending on the circumstances, praise be.
Yeah,
situational context. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, the ultimate off-road footwear, aren't they? Yeah.
Right.
All right. Next one, John.
The legend that is David Hasselhoff.
Praise be. I mean, I think he gets a rough deal sometimes, but I'll tell you, with children involved in or trying to become actors, if my youngest son who lives in Los Angeles ended up being the star of Knight Rider or Baywatch or whatever, I would not
take that.
Good call.
He'd make a lot of money and presumably have a very satisfying career. So who are we to cast the first stone?
Okay, there we go. Big it up for the Hoff.
Don't worry, we're praise be for the Hoff as well. Okay, this is the dance craze, the Macarena.
Yeah, I think praise be. I mean, again, it's novel. So it satisfies one of the key criteria of creativity. It was novel, but also you'd have to say it was effective, even if only for a brief period of time. And those are the two key elements of creativity: novelty and effectiveness. So again, just because we don't like it doesn't mean that it can't be novel and effective, and therefore creative.
It's been very nice. You're going to get tested on this one now, David. The movie Jaws 4: The Revenge.
Okay, I don't know. I'll tell you, 'tis witchcraft. And the reason for that is in terms of creativity, is that's just flogging a dead horse. That's all the creativity, all the novelty has evaporated. So even if it was an effective piece of filmmaking and satisfies the effectiveness criterion, it lacks novelty. You can't really call it creative there.
I'd agree. I know that Michael Caine did it so he could get a bungalow for his mum. And, and as you say, David, it's like flogging a dead shark. So.
All right, let's go for something which could be considered a little bit more controversial. This is again in from the world of clothing. Middle-aged men wearing long socks and strap-on leather sandals at the beach with shorts.
That's witchcraft all the way. And that's not just lacking in creativity, but that is malevolent. That's a deliberate attempt to upset people like you and me and kill us by causing heart attacks. It's a fashion crime. So it is
My father-in-law's listening. Share this with your friends, okay? Share this with your friends. Now, John, I think we've got time for one more. Which one will we do? The food one, do you think? Or
how about, do the food one, yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure which one, but let's go for this one. All right. Marmite toothpaste, witchcraft or praise be?
'Tis witchcraft, and only because everybody knows that the spread of choice for high in iron and vitamin B12 is Vegemite, not Marmite.
Oh,
good catch.
Throws it down. Well, David, thank you for joining us in our thought experiment, and that was malevolent or benevolent.
Thank you. That was exciting.
David, we're drawing towards the end of the show. We've got now the part where we ask for some not so serious business podcast advice, please. And we sort of look at this through the lens of individuals, teams and organizations. So starting off with individuals, what can we do as individuals to develop our creative mindset? Or maybe, as we mentioned earlier, how can we cultivate creativity as a habit?
Yep, it's a great question. And there are lots of simple things that people can do. For example, openness to new experiences is an important thing that helps people to be creative. So try new things. I always say, like, whenever I go to a restaurant, we go to the same Indian restaurant, which is delicious, but I always eat the same dish because, it's comfortable and I like it. And that's not the way to expose yourself to new experiences, which help you to be more open and creative. So next time, you go to a restaurant, try a dish you've never tried before, even if, and what's the worst that's going to happen? You don't like it, but the sky isn't going to fall in. It's not going to hurt anybody. So it's a safe risk to take. And, if you like it, you've exposed yourself to new ideas. You've taken a little risk. You've developed your creative confidence in a way. So just try new things.
And I would apply to myself, always go, especially in travel, the room service, the chicken club sandwich, and or the chicken Caesar salads. Because they're going to be pretty sizey. So it's a good reminder just to try some new things. Now, this probably goes across both teams and leadership. And just phrasing, anytime I've worked with an engineering group, I would say, 80, 90% of them up front will say, hey, Simon, we're not creative, we're engineers. Now, I know you are working or you work in this space of changing that mindset. So what do you do, and how might leaders and teams then maybe build in similar things to the way they work or change that mindset?
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating when you hear people say that in any profession, because it's playing into myths that of course, you instantly sort of kind of lock yourself inside a bubble that's hard to get out of by just saying, basically what they're saying is, I'm not going to be creative. And of course, that sort of negative self-talk already is harmful. But for parents, for teams, for organizations, I think it's a lot of the same things. That maybe the most important one is understanding that creativity is not just a one-size-fits-all process, but there are different stages that require different skills, different attitudes, different motivation, different support. And even more important than the specifics of what that support is or what the motivation is just understanding that you have to do different things at certain times in the process. And then once people kind of accept that, then we can go in and say, well, what are those different things? For example, if you're a boss trying to get your team to come up with new ideas, you've got to give them time to do that. And you've got to give them some support and the resources that they need. If you don't give them enough time or the resources and support, you're pretty much making it impossible. Conversely, when you've got a product launch the next day, that's not the time to be saying, take as much time as you need and so on. So there are times where the pressure has got to be on, but it's understanding that if you want people to engage in the stereotypical elements of creativity, which is particularly like the idea generation, you've got to give them time, resources, and support. Otherwise, you're killing the thing before it's even able to get off the ground.
Just building on that, David, there's a little bit, as you were saying, and for people to recognise that creativity and innovation is a team effort, and almost that they'll play their part in the team effort of being creative as a team, maybe at different points in the process, at different phases on the journey.
Well, I think that, there are two possibilities. I mean, you might have a small team that has to move through all of the stages, in which case they've got to be agile and flexible enough to to do the right thing at the right time. Maybe in a larger organization that different teams take over in each different stage, but it still requires you to understand what those stages are, where you are within that process, and then aligning the people in the team to the needs of that stage. That's the secret sauce of making this work.
Now, thinking around your program again, Life at 9 that you're involved with, what can parents and teachers do to enable their kids' creativity to flourish, understanding that, like we've spoken about so many times, World Economic Forum comes out every year, the future skills for work, we need creativity. But as we've explored on this show and in many of the talks you've done as well, there's a drop-off, the system doesn't support it, mindsets, personality. Long question. So back to what can parents and teachers do to enable their kids' creativity to flourish?
Well, I think especially taking both of those together, it's provide that what I was just talking about, like this support. And to do that, of course, means having some understanding of what's involved. I often say at schools that we have to remember still that the kids spend more time at home than they do at school. So the parents have to play a role in this as well. They can't just expect the teachers to be responsible for all of this. But, we also talk in education about three facets of teaching and creativity. There's teaching about creativity, there's teaching with creativity, and there's teaching for creativity. So, teaching about creativity, you're just explaining to teachers and parents what creativity is and the kinds of things that maybe support it. For teachers teaching with creativity, that's they themselves being creative in the way they teach, which, amongst other things, sets an example to the students. They see somebody else being creative, and they get the message that being creative is a good thing. And then last of all, of course, both for teachers and parents, is teaching for creativity, like explicitly doing an activity that's designed to help kids think more divergently. And of course, we can do that at school, but parents can also play an important role by, I often would say, for example, with my kids, ask your child today, take a screwdriver, for example, and say to them, what if you didn't have a screwdriver, but you still needed to tighten a screw? What else could you use to solve that problem? That's a simple way of encouraging them to do some divergent thinking. And you can do that on the way home from school or just in, conversation around the dinner table. But there are a number of different dimensions, teaching about, teaching with, teaching for, that actually both parents and teachers can back up and support.
All right, David, we're going to wrap up the end of our show now. So this is we call our super rapid fire part of the show. What's one thing you couldn't do without in your life right at the moment?
Simple answer, my glasses. In 2018, I had a detached retina just out of the blue, but there were some complications with that as well. So I ended up with not just the eyesight affected in that eye, but also with double vision. So my vision is very, very poor without glasses. And with double vision, you can't even drive a car, especially at nighttime without corrective glasses. So I'm heavily dependent on my glasses these days.
God, Simon, you're going to go. What are you going to say? We can edit later.
No, we're all sitting here with glasses, so there's a lot of empathy for you for this in this situation. So
we are building the Occupational Philosophers Manifesto. What one thing of all your learning do you think should be included?
I think maybe the best message is you can definitely improve your own creativity, but it's hard work. And in fact, years ago, I defined this notion of spinach creativity versus fast food creativity. Sometimes creativity is packaged up to look sort of bright and easy and so on. That's the fast food version. But I've always said to people, no, creativity is like spinach. It can look horrible, it's hard to eat and doesn't taste very nice, but it's good for you. But, it takes some effort and some commitment and some work to develop creativity.
You can see why the fast food version goes down more easily, doesn't it? Yeah.
But that's the paradox, isn't it? Especially, I think, in organizations, you want the 2-step, the 3-step, the 5-step, the thing we can plug and play. But it's hard work, and it can be a little bit ugly at times as well, and super messy. Yeah.
Then these things of, like experts say, do these 5 things every morning before breakfast and you'll be more creative. That's all garbage. And it's cherry picking, weird little results. There's nothing like that. There's no magic pill. It requires hard work and understanding and an effort to develop it.
Now, building on that, is any books we should be reading right now other than your own 10, which we'll put links to in the show notes as well?
Yeah. Well, I picked one here that I actually first read maybe 10 years ago, but I've read it again, and it's a really interesting book, and I'll just tell you very quickly. It's called Against the Gods, The Remarkable Story of Risk by an author called Peter Bernstein. And it might sound very mathematical and so on, but it's a kind of popular science, nonfiction book, very readable. And it's all about the history of risk management, the history of probability, and how that developed really in the during the sort of Renaissance period and moving forward, and a lot then that ties into everything from statistics to like I said, to modern risk management. But a readable book for people with no background. You don't have to be a mathematician, but a really interesting, really readable book, just a little gem that that I happened to come across and found really fascinating.
Lovely. Definitely going in the show notes. Thank you. David, final question. We're throwing ourselves far into the future. You're being led into your retirement home.
Yeah.
You've had a fantastic career, and the nurse brings you into the lounge where all the residents are sitting there, and they look up expectantly as the nurse says, "Hello, everyone. This is David. He's..." How would you like to be introduced?
I tell you, my answer to this is if they got blank looks when she said, "This is David Cropley," but then when she said, "the father of da da da," and they all went, "Oh, of course," then I'd feel like my work was done, and that was sort of a satisfactory outcome. I want my kids to have happy, interesting, successful careers, and then I'd feel like that was the legacy I'd left.
They might also go, "Oh, that's Arthur's boy. You've seen
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Now, just before we jump into our next question, or just to wrap us up, with the program Life at 9, and where did that end up? Did it track beyond? Yeah, can you I guess a better question is, do you ever see someone and you go, "Oh yeah, you did really well in the test," and you go, "I thought that might happen," or "Yeah, how did that end up?"
Well, I'm not sure whether, because these things are always subject to the vagaries of funding and so on. I don't know I think they might have made a Life at 11, but I'm not sure if they continue. But just coincidentally, only a few months ago, I saw some news story about one of the boys who'd been on the Life at 9 show, who was probably the most creative one in terms of the testing. and just a little follow up on him. But it didn't really go into much detail. But I thought, I'd love to know what he was doing now and so on, because he came out very creative on the tests. And so, just out of sort of having formed a bit of a connection with these kids, I'd love to see where they're all at now, because they're all sort of 22 years old or something now. So, well and truly kind of into their adult lives.
Yeah.
But hopefully not being malevolently creative as well. So, so look, just quickly, what are you up to next? What's on the agenda over the next 12 months? What exciting projects have you got on? I imagine there are many.
Well, as I hinted at before, with this sort of looming retirement, I think that's really a good thing, because I'm quite focused, and I think it's really sort of crystallizing into. I'm very keen to really try and solve this problem of the gap between creativity research and application in education, and I think the solution to that is the work I've been doing using AI to automate that drawing test of creativity, and a couple of other related creativity tools, all of which are about trying to give teachers really credible tools about creativity that are quick and easy and provide meaningful information to them.
David, where can we find you, connect with you? Is it LinkedIn? What's the various places people can get in touch?
Yeah, I LinkedIn is a good one. I have sort of bursts of activity, but then sometimes I sort of cool off and think, I've got other things to do. But I like to. There's a lot of interesting conversations and things on LinkedIn. I find it's very helpful to see things that other people are doing and to sort of test your own ideas. So LinkedIn is a good one. I mean, if people Google me, because the university provides a sort of public-facing website, so I think it's quite easy to find my information if anybody was interested and wanted to get in touch. But also in a more kind of everyday sense, I'll be in Munich, London, and Dublin in sort of late June, early July. A little bit later this year. So if anybody was listening and thought, that he'd be a great guy to have a beer with, then get in touch with me if you think that we might be in the same city at the same time. And I'm always up for a pint of beer.
Preferably at Stein if you're in Germany. So,
Stein in Germany. If you're in London, David, let me know. I'll make sure, obviously, I connect with you. Do let me know. I'll happily buy you a pint. Maybe.
Well, like I say, I will be there. Very in a matter of weeks, sort of 6 weeks. So I'll try to make a point of touching base with you, John.
Great stuff.
Well, David, it's been an absolute pleasure. Like, I almost was unsure at some stages what next question to ask, because I wasn't sure how to get my thoughts into line to even sort of process some of the content. I'm saying that only in a positive way. So look, as always, just to hear someone speak with such passion and insight, especially around the things which are dear to us as well, which is around building a more creative world, I guess, as well. And that's a big part of what the podcast is. Just thanks so much for sharing. And look, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you very much. I think you guys have done a great job and rolling in some very interesting questions and obviously very well prepared as well. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, David. It's been a delight.
What a great guest David was. What a joy to speak to.
He was indeed. He set a very high bar from the start, I thought. I mean, if I think about any takeaways, as we often do, within, I think, the first 10 minutes, he'd given us 2 cracking life lessons, which it's all in the preparation, and stay engaged if you want to live well and live old. So, there we go.
So that could be the show.
Yeah, we could have wrapped up then. I think that was great. You go, yeah, there you go. That's a nice little philosophical takeaway. What did you get? What did you take away?
Well, apart from, if you got nothing to do on your day, just translate an old Latvian poem for fun. Apart from that, I really, really liked, if you say you're not creative, you are locking yourself into a bubble of, I'm not going to create. And it's a really nice reminder around the personality of creativity, the words we tell ourselves, the motivational piece as well. But I'm going to use that all the time, because what you say locks yourself into a way of acting. I really liked, as we know this to some extent, but innovation isn't a one size fits all, nor is creativity. And I think that's really, really important to remember organizationally or even personally. Like what you might do one day might give you a different result the next day, but that's okay. That's okay. So I think that is a really, really nice one as well. And I know you like this one, so I've stolen this off you. Creativity is hard work. We want the fast food, but really it is spinach. So, yeah, and it's, it doesn't taste so good to start with, a lot of effort, but it's very, very good for you.
Can I suggest another hashtag at this moment and say T-shirts with hashtag eat the spinach as a little reminder?
Yeah, eat the spinach.
Eat the spinach.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, I like it. Eat the spinach. All right, John, what about you?
Well, I think in the advice piece, I think what can we do to develop a creative mindset as individuals? The first off the bat, he just said, look, just open us to new ideas, new experiences, new things, taking safe risks, that experimentation. That's the key thing. If you can just keep pushing yourself into that space, then ultimately that's going to open up your creative channels. If that's the word. But
like
that as being quite key to it. As a domain general thing that he might say that crosses any discipline, openness to ideas and experiences is key. He also then, when we were talking about creativity in education, I just thought it was nice to distinguish the three key elements of teaching about creativity and making sure there's a clear understanding about what we're talking about, teaching with creativity, so finding ways within the curriculum and just the education system more generally to have approaches which set an example whereby creativity is woven into the way you deliver or facilitate or educate around certain topics. And teaching for creativity, which is what we often think it's about. How do we teach people to be creative? So that is important, but teaching about and teaching with is equally important and needs attention. And finally, that we did actually have David quite clearly say that Pop-Tarts are indeed an abomination and a clear example of malevolent creativity.
Yeah, 'tis witchcraft. So.
'Tis witchcraft.
All right, John, that brings us to the end of our show. And what I'm going to do in the show notes, I have been working on a creativity diagnostic myself, which just gives you a bit of a flavor of what's going on in your organization, and just 20 questions to think, are we doing this? What's it like for us? What does this look like? And it gives you a report at the end. Now, I will pop it in the show notes for you to look at as well, but it might be, based on what we've done today, nice benchmark, just start thinking around what's happening in your organization. And please, if you've enjoyed this show, tell your friends, and we ask you to, take the minute or so to leave a review, but please do either of those, and make sure you hit the little plus button up in the corner of your feed, which means you subscribe to the show, and it'll pop into your feed as whenever we put a show out.
Yeah. Check out the website as well, occupationalphilosophers.com. You can get in touch if you've got ideas that you'd like us to explore, themes, etc. But in the meantime, stay curious, make stuff, have fun, play more, and most importantly, Simon,
get out there, try new foods, and date life.